Welcome to my big sketchbook tour of 2025, showing everything I drew and painted in my sketchbooks this year, and trying to justify why I need this many. This will take a while, so I hope you grab a snack, some tea or coffee, and maybe a sketchbook or two to doodle in. First, let's look at the complete sketchbooks. One is just an old drawing practice sketchbook. This has been with me since before I started this channel. My very first video for the channel actually was this portrait sketch. So a bit of nostalgia here. And when I say drawing practice, this really is all about figure studies. In 2025, I mostly just added a couple figure studies, had a very intense relationship with the Asaro head, which you can see my notes for here. The Asaro head is a more sculptural 3D approach to portrait drawing. Here I was focusing on the nose, some portrait studies, some more color pencil tests, and then more Asaro head studies, this time with a focus on the mouth. My cat, who is, by the way, standing under the desk right now, crying every once in a while. I quite like how the little shapes here turned out. And then one final Asaro head to kind of wrap up this sketchbook without much fanfare. This was a Daler Rowney sketchbook, and I really liked the paper. The only reason I didn't repurchase the exact same one was that I'm not a huge fan of spiral bound sketchbooks. They are a bit of a pain to scan and to paint on the left side of. But the paper was amazing, and if these were easier to find in South Korea, I would have maybe gotten a different version without the spiral binding. So if you just need a space for drawing practice, specifically with pencil, colored pencil, I highly recommend the paper of this one. I'd wanted to show a larger sketchbook next, but because my cat is now here, let's take a quick look at these small ones. I've done separate sketchbook tours where I look at these in detail, but it's another study sketchbook focused on movie scenes. I loved everything about it. I'm really happy with it. It's complete, and there's a separate sketchbook tour linked in the description. And this marked the beginning of my Hanemühle phase. And the second complete one, or rather the third complete one, is this old Arches hot pressed watercolor sketchbook from way back. I've also got a separate flip through of this one, as it really shows my journey from a few years ago to now, over different media, not just watercolors, travel sketches, and some more movie studies in gouache. And literally after I'd filmed that flip through, it finally fell apart completely, so now I have to be a bit more careful with it. So I guess we'll continue with small sketchbooks. Here we have two sketchbooks I didn't really use that much, so let's call them the abandoned ones for 2025. I'll of course continue using them in the future, and I'll go a bit into why these didn't quite work out for me. One is the craft paper sketchbook by Hanemühle here, and I used it for Zorn palette studies in gouache. An opaque medium is of course great for toned paper. And look, I really like the toned paper. I'm a huge fan of working on any kind of, be it gray toned or beige toned paper, but toned paper is a pain to scan. I like to make prints out of sketches that have turned out nicely. So while I found this really interesting as a study opportunity because of how different colors look on this toned background, adding additional warmth as a contrast to anything painted on it, it's just not something that I've been finding myself reach for a lot. Another art medium that really works very well on craft paper are acrylic markers. Compared to gouache, they also, of course, don't use as much liquid, so the paper gets less wavy, doesn't buckle as much. So I might continue using this specifically with markers, acrylic markers, and I actually found that some colored pencils like the Derwent Drawing work okay on this kind of. If I use enough pressure, I could probably get away with colored pencils in this. I do plan on using it in the future again. And then the other one that I would probably call abandoned in 2025 is the Arches cold pressed sketchbook. This has been with me for a long time. There are old studies in this, my first steps with acrylics, some watercolors. There are also a couple actual travel sketches for which I actually quite like it. I used it a bunch when we traveled to Switzerland via Singapore last year. These are all from Switzerland still. And I think the reason I used it more there was because I was actually on vacation, right? I was there for nearly a week in the mountains and had time in between spending time with family to really sketch some larger scenes. While when I'm in Korea, I just find less opportunity to take advantage of this larger format. So you can see some studies in watercolor of people I saw at the airport from Jeju to Gimpo. And then a couple more sketches of, again, people and travel sketches. A single page inspired by Mermaid, where I used the kind of gemstone themed Primatech paints by Daniel Smith. And then very sadly that's it for 2025. I think literally the only things painted in 2025 and not December 2024 is this one double spread. That has nothing to do with the quality of the sketchbook. The paper itself is amazing. I actually quite like the cold pressed paper by Arches. I think just the format isn't all that handy for when I'm outside. It's a bit too big and intimidating to bring with me for like quick 5-minute sketches at a cafe or on a hike or something like that. So if I'm not on an actual vacation, this just doesn't see any use. But yeah, looking through this, I might just have to do a few more of these figure drawings, these more spontaneous sketches, just get over my fear of this sketchbook because it is such a nice one. Let's be real, this was an expensive sketchbook. And I think that is kind of what's also holding me back a bit. We'll see what happens to this one in the new year. So, 2 sketchbooks that through no real fault of their own haven't seen much use, and 2 that are complete. And now it is time. Just in case you're here for the very first time on my channel, welcome, I guess. And this is my work sketchbook. And if you've been here before, you're probably familiar with it because I use it a lot. So what I do in here is plan illustrations. So there's a lot of thumbnail sketches, figure studies for upcoming art. These are all older. I'm trying to find the beginning of 2025. Would that be around here? Yeah, probably. So this is what you can expect from this sketchbook. A lot of thumbnail sketches of scribbled figures. It's where I collect ideas, maybe with some notes on what I want to draw, because even I won't be able to tell what some of these stick figures are supposed to be. Once a sketch or idea progresses past the stick figure stage, we get stuff like this, with stick figures that are more advanced. I usually break down my sketches into cool and warm tones, or just black and white for a value breakdown. Here are some ideas for the Lufian series. I have a painting process in an old art vlog from the beginning of 2025. You can see how it went through different iterations. There are also some sketches for the third illustration in this series that I hope to work on this winter. So this kind of shows how slow some of this progress can be. I don't always have time to tackle large personal artwork. These sketches happened during my Asaro head study phase. Illustration planning can drag on for a couple pages, so here we have even more Lufian, and then I transitioned into a more galaxy mermaid theme. This is a Hanemühle D&S sketchbook. And if I could only remember what that stands for, draft and sketch. It's a very smooth paper, so compared to, for example, the Daler Rowney study sketchbook that I kept that had a light texture that made all the pencil lines look really nice, this is more of a completely smooth finish. So it's great for me to just jot down ideas here in any kind of medium, though I often default to colored pencils and pencils. A lot of spring 2025 was spent working on some projects for local markets and book fairs here on Jeju in South Korea in general. So these were sketches for a little art book. And then we transitioned back to more illustrative work or portraiture, some Dracula-themed portraits that I've since painted, one that is still waiting to be painted. October went by way too quickly, which is when I wanted to paint all these. Some Dragon Age fan art that I also still want to paint. So this is really where I collect ideas for when I have like vacation and want to paint something personal. I often forget to use fixative in this sketchbook. So you have more Azaro heads here with notes. These you might be familiar with from a recent video of the Fusion Fragment book cover. So these must have been sometime around April or May. I'm terrible about writing down dates. Please don't do what I do. These you might also be familiar with. I'd decided to participate in the Folio Society book illustration contest because I really liked the theme of Rapunzel, the fairy tale, and these were my thumbnail sketches for it. I have a painting process for that illustration and I'm really happy because I got into the long list selection of the contest. And here we have thumbnail illustrations for a book illustration project I'm working on. Hey, now I can date where we are because this is very clearly Mermaid, so everything before that must have been April or March. So here we have Mermaid with some figure studies and not sure what that is here. I think these might have been some Dungeons and Dragons sketch ideas, but apparently I didn't bother writing down anything about it, so we'll never know. Once we went into early summer, my parents were visiting Jeju. I was traveling with them, and in my free time, I really didn't have any time left for sketching because I had to use any free moment just to finish work. And I also got really into gouache around that time period. So this is very sparse. These are just a couple sketches for the themed exhibits with the Bad Apple Artist Collective. So this might be a fun one to take a closer look at because the next few pages will be all about this project. All of the following pages are for a cover, a wraparound cover for the broken binding. But since I mostly have single colored pencils that I buy open stock in various earth tones for portrait sketches, I completely relied on my single large set of RTX colored pencils, which were amazing for all these really vibrant sketches here. And there's also a lot of acrylic marker on them as I would block in with colored pencil and then go in with white and gray and pastel toned acrylic markers to carve out highlights. So using a full spectrum of colored pencils compared to these usual ones I use here kind of helped me exploring these more adventurous color palettes. Here we are getting closer to the final result with this turquoise, teal to purple color palette, some pose studies. Here I started to transition from just colored pencils to also watercolor gouache, because the closer I can keep the material to the one I'm then in the end painting in, the easier that transition will be. So here we have, I think I might have even used acrylics on this. Might be gouache, might be acrylics. Should have really written that down. And because there was some empty space here, there's also more for the vampire book illustration series I'm working on. Here you see me actually break down the full wraparound book jacket format with different options. And I did finish up these sketches digitally. I also have some digital layout sketches, digital color thumbnails. I just personally much prefer thinking on paper. And then one more pretty much final thumbnail sketch at this stage with all the individual elements placed where they should be, and we only ended up changing the main character's pose at one later point. That was a good chunk of sketches there from last summer. We have more Bad Apple Artist Collective stuff, I think from August, when I was experimenting with a new set of gouache paints I'd gotten, and the Derwent drawing colored pencils. So suddenly we go from these purples and teal, very vibrant colors, to a lot of earth tones as I was exploring that very limited but beautiful color selection. Here we have some sketches for projects I want to work on this winter. If you're curious on how a sketchbook page like this actually happens, with all my random thoughts that go into compositions, then I have a full kind of sketch with me process with voiceover for this one. And then I was pretty sure that that was all I'd sketched in here for 2025, but it's actually a surprisingly large amount of other thumbnail sketches here, more for the vampire book illustrations. I think I've mentioned those a couple of times without actually explaining what that's about, but I'm working on a couple interior and end paper illustrations for Fangs for Nothing, which is a really fun vampire romance book with like a lot of fun twists on the tropes that go on there. Our vampire, having over the centuries accumulated too much stuff, started too many hobbies, and he needs a professional organizer to come help and clean up and declutter his castle. So these were for that as well. For all of these illustrations, I'm trying to include a lot of little fun details in the background, because the decluttering and accumulation of creative projects is such a fun theme to play around with. So here I was just trying out different camera angles. Sometimes the simplest scenes are the ones I need the most sketches for, because a simple scene like two characters in front of a fireplace can look incredibly boring. So I was trying to tilt the camera a bit, have different ways of the characters facing each other, where to put the cat on which lap. Sometimes I just need multiple thumbnails to figure things out. And then same project, different illustrations. Here I've actually started using gouache for my thumbnail color sketches, because gouache has taken over my life, I guess. Like I mentioned earlier, the closer the material that I sketch in is to the material that I then actually paint in, the easier that transition goes, because I can directly translate a burnt sienna ultramarine blue mix to acrylics, when compared to that, a colored pencil layering method might be very different in how it expresses color. And oh, okay, I forgot that there's even more here. Here we have more of the Fae sketches. I think I shared the painting process for that recently. A couple first drafts for another book cover illustration. Here's a really fun project that I'm now working on, and it will show up in another sketchbook later in this video. I often hop from one sketchbook to another. This is not gonna be chronological, as you may have already noticed. Yeah, here were the rough drafts, some notes. I always take notes on when I read a chapter or even an entire book. I take notes and screenshots of character descriptions, interesting details, quotes that stand out or capture a mood. And then I sketched some rough ideas, some slightly less rough ideas. Here we're back to the Derwent drawing pencils, which are great for moody color block-ins, as they are very soft. You can fill in large surfaces quite quickly. Lately, I've been sketching while lying down on the heated Korean-style floor mat in the evenings, so colored pencils are perfect for that very non-ergonomic drawing setup. And this is the sketch we're going with, so you'll see more of that later. And I think now we're here. Yeah. At this point, I filled a bit over half of this sketchbook, and here's maybe a general note on my attitude to sketchbooks. While I of course enjoy the feeling of completing a little project like these movie sketches, generally I don't feel this need to fill a sketchbook within a certain period of time or as quickly as possible, or to stay in one sketchbook and just work in that for a specific time period. Because really these are tools to maybe capture ideas like this sketchbook, and I'm filling it at the pace that I can actually then take the ideas and paint them in acrylics, which takes me much longer than the sketches do, so there's an automatic speed limit to this one. And there are still old ideas in here that I haven't had time to paint yet, but it's kind of a library of all my ideas over the last 2 years, and that's probably why this is my most precious sketchbook. I've been adding more and more stickers here, by the way. I really like this one here in the corner from a Jeju stationery fair. So we finished the big one, the smallest ones, the abandoned ones. Let's move on to all the rest. Here we have a new addition to the sketchbook lineup. This is a Hanemühle watercolor journal, watercolor book. It's not the 100% cotton version because I'm not planning to use that much watercolor in here. It's mostly for my gouache obsession, and it's replacing the small Arche travel sketchbook that I'd filled. In October we went to the mainland, so we visited Gwangju and Mokpo. We only spent one afternoon and the night in Gwangju, and we were visiting friends, so I didn't get any sketching done except in a different sketchbook, which will come up soon. But in Mokpo, which is a harbor city, we found this cafe on a hill with traditional architecture, but then the industrial harbor in the back, which I found a really interesting contrast. And I used watercolors for this. I'm not sure if I was even supposed to draw on this paper. It did feel a bit different because it's the back of a page, but still I quite liked it. There is some bleed through from the next page happening here. Some of the blue paint I used on the next page came through, but oh well, it's just travel sketches. This one is really just the view from the hotel room over Mokpo, and I kind of liked the old-fashioned 90s, 80s style buildings. There's a certain period in Korean architecture where you have a lot of rounded roofs and a lot of bright yellows and reds in the architectural design. Then in the background we had all the high-rise buildings, apartment buildings. So just a quick view in gouache. I used the Irodori autumn gouache set for the travel sketches. And we took the ferry back to Jeju, so very early in the morning, went to the harbor, and I had a quick glimpse of some of the islands going by. And then a few weeks ago we went up Halasan, and I sketched this very loose view of this very rough study of some of the volcanic rock formations you can find up there. This is the same gouache palette as these two. The Autumn Irodori gouache are quite versatile when it comes to moods you can create. And that's it so far. But so far I'm quite happy with this. I don't think I'd enjoy it as much if I focused mainly on watercolor, because while this was going okay, I think there's definitely better paper out there for watercolors, but it's quite affordable, and for gouache I really like the quite minimal texture this paper has, and it works perfectly for the way I use those. This is probably my newest sketchbook, so welcome to the club. Here we have a couple smaller ones. I'm not even sure if this can be called a proper sketchbook, but yeah, actually maybe. This is just the Canson Croquis pad. They were on sale at the Korean art shop, so I got a couple. And it really is just a little sketch pad. I had this with me at a few events and when visiting Jeju City. So there's some thumbnail sketches for ideas I had, warm-up sketches. Sometimes I use it to clarify an illustration idea, just if I have nothing else at hand. This is always kind of next to my desk. I think this was for a D&D party illustration concept. You can see that this is like the rougher version of my big Hanemühle concept sketchbook. Anything that I kind of just want to jot down before I forget about it, but I can't see my bigger sketchbook at the moment. Maybe I'm in front of my PC or I'm on the go. It finds a place in here. Recently I've started using a lot of different fountain pens, so that's the general color shift when it comes to line drawings. Here these were sketches for my ghost tourist concept. This is a really handy format to just have with me when I'm at a cafe waiting for someone, or the ghost tourist ones I was waiting for a doctor's appointment in the waiting room, and it's very like subtle. No one notices that you're actually sketching something. And it's very lightweight because there's no hardcover or even proper softcover binding, so this easily finds its way to wherever I am going. Then this one is much heavier. It has a proper hardcover binding, and it's the RTX sketchbook. Full disclosure, I got these as part of a sponsored video that I shared a review for, and this was kind of a bonus they sent to me. And I've actually been really enjoying these because of this book binding that they used for these. The binding method means that you can always kind of have these pages lie flat, which especially for smaller sketchbook sizes can be a bit tricky. So because there's no like wave happening around here, it feels like the sketchbook is larger than its small format. I have more of a workable space in it. You can see that I mostly ended up drawing portraits, and here I did have a small just portrait focused sketchbook in the past that had this same size but a way less nice paper. So I felt a bit nostalgic for that and started sketching portraits in here. I also like to have this on my lap when maybe watching a series or a movie. So this is when these two sketches happened, and I'm actually quite happy with how they turned out. I want to mention the paper because if you remember my Daler Rowney, the spiral bound study sketchbook that I showed at the beginning of the video, this paper feels very similar to that. It's great for colored pencil, lots of pencil layering in general, with just enough tooth to create beautiful textures but without being distracting. It also holds up to erasing quite well. I used the kneaded eraser and the Mono Tombow eraser for this one to carve out some of the lighting. I'm really positively surprised with the paper quality overall of this one. Another bonus point for this one goes to how easy these are to scan, because usually, especially smaller sketchbooks, I have to really push to get a usable scan, because usually around this area wouldn't lie completely flat in the scanner and create a distorted view. But these ones scan beautifully. You probably have seen some of these sketches if you follow me on Patreon. Here we have something fun. I've recently watched a class online on sketching movement, which is usually something I struggle with a lot. A lot of my portrait studies are incredibly static. It's kind of what I default to. The class was all about capturing movement with lines and then pulling focus to key areas with watercolors. So I had just watched Frankenstein and started sketching some scenes based on movie GIFs, which I really like as a reference material. This one is a scene from Nosferatu, and I tried to capture the arm movement as it transitions over that like 2-second span that the GIF actually took. And I really like the scribbly nature of it. The flat laying page binding really helps with these full spread sketches as well. I'm using a waterproof pen here in 0.2. I rarely use 0.1 or smaller because it gets a bit too finicky and scribbly. And then here is one I really like. This is the creature, as you might call him. And it's just this small loop that I kept playing on repeat of him going from a crouch to a sitting position, and I tried to capture that with this diagonal movement, and then just in the one static pose that he then kept, I added some color to maybe ground it a bit more here. And then one more Frankenstein scene. This is Victor after his failed experiment doing his very dramatic I'm now angry and depressed and I'm going to bed. And he does this little twirl of the shirt that he has taken off that I found really interesting, like just a flick of the hand. All of his movements in the movie compared to the creature are very erratic, and you kind of constantly feel anxious about him lashing out when watching him. So I try to capture some of that nervous energy with the line work, and I'm quite happy with how the composition turned out. I didn't add color to most of these except for some accents. The paper here is okay for watercolors, though I wouldn't want to use too much paint, too much water, or else we'll get some warping. So that's what we have here. Here we have the larger companion, which has the same binding. It also has a pocket in the front. I usually don't use these, but in case you are wondering, here's just a fun little detail. I am drawing little miniature versions of paintings I've either finished or I'm working on. It's just acrylic markers in kind of the key color of the painting, and then fountain pen sketches on top. I got this sketchbook, I think, end of July. So here we have some sketches from August, just portrait drawings with the Derwent drawing colored pencils. This was the original test page where I tried to layer a lot of colored pencils in different styles. I also used alcohol markers here as a base, the acrylic markers here, and watercolors here. I try to really test a variety of mixed media, and I think the paper, looking at it from this side, you have a little bit of bleed from the alcohol markers around here, but overall this has held up really well. It didn't interfere with the drawings on the next page. These are random portrait studies that then somehow, by connecting the eye line, I found there needed to be a bit more storytelling, so I added these random planets. I think I drew all of these while watching something with my partner. So kind of like this one, because this has a hard cover and this kind of convenient binding, I often have it just on my knees, propped up somewhere, and like to sketch in it quite mindlessly. This is some kind of elf, who knows. Here we have sketches for the Lufian Halls of Mundos piece, and I haven't had time for the actual illustration yet because it will be really big and have so many characters on it, and I just don't want to be working on client pieces during the day and then switching to this at night. I want to give it more of a full focus, so I'm kind of hoping for the New Year's full holidays there. So I used gouache, colored pencil, some markers here. I don't think I'd enjoy this as a true mixed media sketchbook in the sense of watercolors and lots of gouache layers, but it can take quite a few paint layers without any issue. The paper doesn't dissolve or peel, and even the warping and buckling is quite controlled. So here you have my D&D character from an old campaign that we recently kind of picked back up for a mini bonus adventure. So I sketched that while playing in front of my PC, again, kind of just propping the sketchbook up somewhere. This was when I first got the red fountain pen and suddenly was obsessed with red outlines for everything. I've also been working on some character design ideas for a series of Korean historical setting inspired but fantastical creatures illustrations. So just outfits of the Goguryeo, Joseon and Shilla period. I quite like how her expression here turned out and the patterns in the Goguryeo period. These were done in the Derwent drawing pencils. Pretty much any time from here on, when you see colored pencil, it's probably a Derwent drawing. No, I lied. Immediately the next page, this isn't a Derwent drawing, but this is a really random one that I love. It's also by Derwent. It's a watercolor pencil in the shade Madder Carmine. And I'm really picky when it comes to red colors. This one has some cool undertones, but it doesn't lean too pink. It doesn't go brown either, and it's not too bright. So it can actually properly shade darker values, and whenever I do want to add shading with it, I can add water to it, but it's also just a really pleasant pencil for just sketching. So it might seem really random. I only have this single shade. So this is to mirror these here, different time periods, historical settings, and hairstyles. Here, very similarly, I used a graphite pencil, but a water-soluble one. I really like having that as an option. Add some water to my pencil sketches. These turned then later into a Faye-inspired painting, and I just drew some eyes because I miss kind of the simplicity of that. This is still done in a mix of, I think, the Blackwing matte and that water-soluble pencil. I've been trying to do more figure studies now towards the end of the year because I feel bad about how much I've neglected that, but oh well, it's a bit late for it now. Here I was sketching some friends while visiting and drew a couple cats. My own cat, of course, always moves immediately when I start sketching, so it's a bit of a hopeless affair. And here we were playing the final D&D session, had the final boss battle, and my character died dramatically. So I just kept sketching what everyone else was also doing during the final session, and this is me, dead. It's actually fun to kind of look at these simple doodles. We were playing for a few hours, and I just had this next to my keyboard with a couple colored pencils that are trying again within reach. And this is kind of how I started, going from when I worked mostly in marketing and making stationery designs and stuff like that. About 5 years ago, I started drawing while we played tabletop games of all kinds and started drawing my characters. And here, as we came back to that, it was fun to reflect on that because in the meantime, so much about my style has changed, and I do now work in book illustration, especially with a fantasy focus. I've done a lot of character art commissions before that, and just feels like we've come full circle. Here we go. Again, like I mentioned, I have been feeling bad about not practicing anatomy enough, so some random warm-up sketches of true ref poses. And here we have more Frankenstein movie scenes, again with this scribbly approach and the watercolors, and I'll have a dedicated video for that since I filmed the process. And oh, I guess that's it. I recently watched the first episode of Sulgiron Isasengwal. I think the English title is Hospital Playlist, so Korean drama, and I quite like one of the main characters so far, so I did a quick sketch while watching. This started end of July and August, and this is kind of a very random and more character art focused sketchbook that I really enjoy. Okay, we're closer to the end now. We have 3 sketchbooks left, and this one, if you've been to my channel before, you might be familiar with. It's the Strathmore Art Journal for Mixed Media, and it's where my gouache obsession took over in summer. I've been mentioning buckling pages or warping paper, and this is where I kind of let go of all that perfectionism and just kept on layering gouache paint. All of these sketches were originally captured while I was traveling around Jeju, kind of being travel guide and translator and chauffeur all at once, so I didn't have much time for sketches. I mostly had this pencil with me and would sketch in a lot of rough drawings to then finish at home. Some I did start on location, others I had barely 5 minutes. These were all done in the Holbein Irodori gouache sets that I'd gotten around that time. So you might have seen these show up in previous videos if you're at all familiar with my channel. It's always difficult for me to balance my different art interests. Of course, off camera there's a lot of just illustration work happening that I don't really show on this channel, but in my free time I love character art, I love portraiture, I love learning. It sounds stupid, but I really like stuff like studies, master studies, anatomy, Asaro head models. I find stuff like that fascinating. But I also just enjoy drawing cute little coffee cups that as memories of cafes I've visited over the summer, or colorful little landscapes, because we live in such a beautiful area, and if I'm just at my desk working all the time, I don't really appreciate it as much as I maybe should, and these travel sketchbooks have really helped me with my observation and kind of being more mindful overall. This one also got a very dedicated video because the sketches kind of escalated, and I'm calling these still sketches because it's not what I would consider a finished illustration. I would never submit something like this to a client, it's too rough, but I think that's the charm that I wanted to capture, this rougher brushwork, the fading edges, and it's a style I really like working in. These all went into the Jeju Wanderings art scene. And this kind of art is also what connects me more closely to the local art community, because so much of the Jeju art community is very focused on Jeju landscapes, cute little illustrations of mandarins and the cats that are everywhere, something that matches the vibes of the island. And with how much paint I layered and how much abuse these pages took for me also painting on both sides, the Strathmore Mixed Media Art Journal is probably my favorite paper I've worked on all year. I also used this for my Derwent drawing colored pencil experiments when I first got the full set. Here I have the autumn set. That's my first Irodori gouache set that I got the full size version of. Again, some master studies of temples I'd visited, and Jeju landscapes. Here I recently started another sketch of the ocean on a very windy day after a storm had passed. And that's it. I spent a lot of time in this sketchbook over summer, and now that is kind of winding down and I don't want to go anywhere because it's windy and cold. So I guess this will be a bit on the back burner until next spring. But I really love this sketchbook and I highly recommend it if you're a bit of a mixed media artist. And now, my least favorite sketchbook. I don't know what to tell you. I've used this so much though. So it's a bit of a conundrum because I don't like the paper, but because the format is so handy and it's lightweight and it's cheap, I keep reaching for it. So maybe it's an amazing sketchbook and I just can't accept that. I originally got this as a gift and didn't immediately vibe with the paper. It has this ivory tone to the pages, which I just don't like. It's also very thin and has zero texture. So I ended up sketching some ideas for that cat-themed art series. And then I just kept taking it with me to art markets. For me, there are two parts to art market season on Jeju. I go to a lot of events in spring, and then I stop going in summer because the humidity and heat destroy my postcard prints. So I only go to select indoor events in summer, and then once it becomes autumn, I go back to events. And whenever I went somewhere, this sketchbook traveled with me. So these are like a dog that wandered around a market, stuff like that. A lot of quick warm-up sketches happen in here as well. Here you can see I also wrote down timers. These were done at a cafe. Some figure drawings and portraits that I sketched at home. This was quite fun because I used one of those multicolor ballpoint pens with some movie scene studies. This one here is a sketch in Neocolor 2. So you can already tell that this is turning into a bit of a mixed media sketchbook. It really doesn't handle water all that well, so my Neocolor sketch used very little water for blending, and then I went back in with Neocolor like a drawing pencil on top. Here we have some acrylic marker sketches from at a cafe and then a movie study. The markers then stayed with me for quite a while. I had a very obsessive marker phase for a bit, where I used them for random sketches in the morning to warm up. And then while traveling, I didn't feel safe having acrylic markers in my bag. So when I traveled around Jeju Island to different temples and the like, I had my gouache palette with me. And of course, again, the Derwent drawing pencil that I had at the time. A quick scene from when we took the boat to Kappado, the Sanbangsan hiking route. I think this was an early experiment for that broken binding cover sketch. So here is where all of this sketchbook hopping comes back in. Yeah, there were more. I had this really urgent deadline for sketches, but my in-laws happened to visit the island without any warning, so suddenly I was kind of trying to juggle a 3-hour drive and day spent with them, but also getting at least some sketches started so that I could then finish the color versions later at night and send those. So I just had this with me and sketched in the car. Here a small gouache sketch for the hulls of mandos, some quick building sketches. These are the Korean mythology creature sketches, the rough version. They show up again later in the big Hanemüller sketchbook. These are the acrylic marker thumbnail sketches that I drew when I first had the ideas pop up, and then I translated those into more detailed sketches in the larger sketchbook. Same here. A lot of this sketchbook happens to be in conversation with my larger one. This is just what I might have on me in like a spare moment of time. And here we are entering the fountain pen era. I got a fountain pen kind of randomly at the art shop when I was heading to a stationary art fair, and suddenly I was using fountain pen for everything, for sketching people at the art fair, the other sellers there, and then same for some other art market events after that, but with the red fountain pen. This was done with a rainbow pencil. These as well were done at the art market. First some warm-up sketches of other sellers and then just a random character sketch. This was done in this Derwent watercolor pencil, which is really nice on this paper. The paper barely has any texture, so I like using very soft, subtle pencils on this one. These are some pattern designs I needed for another project of poisonous plants, and I used acrylic markers to kind of break down the colors. Anything where I have to be decisive and not focus so much on blending, but just on design choices, I really like to bring out acrylic markers, like how these turned out. More fountain pen, but this time with neo color mixed together from a cafe I was waiting for an appointment at. These are more of the ghost tourist illustration idea, and I was at another art market. So this sketchbook kind of became this really random space from gouache to acrylic markers to colored pencils, anything that I have with me at different locations. I also took it with me to Mokpo and Gwangju. You've seen some snippets of in that new travel sketchbook. Here I thought this one is really cute because at the airport I don't like drawing strangers. I feel it's kind of invasive. People you see me sketch here are people that I know work at the same events as I do, and they know that I'm drawing them and are okay with it. I don't like to do that to strangers. So instead I decided to just draw my outfit for the 4 days. That would have been more interesting if I had more than like one sweater with me. I just think these turned out really cute. These are all done in a mix of the Derwent drawing and a single Garandash luminance. I really like the Derwent drawing for these line-focused sketches with very simple shading. And so I would bring this one out for more landscape-focused gouache illustrations. This was what I'd sketch these quick little memories with. The food we ate at dinner, or the art supplies I had with me on the trip, and even just the cafe we quickly dropped by to buy egg tarts. And I think this has forced me to be a bit more quick and decisive in my on-the-go sketching. This is a scene of us leaving at the harbor and from a bar we went to in the evening. And immediately the day after, I was back at an art event again. I quite like how this turned out. I named it Being Perceived. And we're back to some fountain pen sketches of friends that visited us. And I, of course, had to sketch my cat in his little bowl. And then the markets kind of tapered down. It's become colder. The wind has become heavier. I'm not going to any more outdoor events. I just had a couple indoor events, and those are usually really busy, so I didn't sketch much. Got a new fountain pen recently. These are really cheap here. They're by Monami. I'm just kind of obsessed with this green ink here. It's this really nice forest green. So I'd sketch friends and my partner, and that's it for this one. Just from like May until December, I got quite a lot of sketching done in this one, just kind of by accident. So do I like this sketchbook? I guess yeah, right? Because I'm using it a lot. There's something about it that really works well. I do like it for pen illustrations. Even when a pen illustration or a travel sketch like these turns out nice, it's a pain to scan and the ivory tone is really difficult to remove cleanly. It's just something to doodle in without any larger goals. I really like this sticker that I got from a friend's shop. Now we have only one sketchbook left. It's a sad one, because I was so excited when I got this and then didn't use it at all over summer and only recently got back into it. Let's take a look. This is the Hanemühle 100% cotton watercolor sketchbook. And I'd gotten it early in the year when I'd been updating my watercolor palettes. So here I was testing out these granulating paints from the Nicolas Lopez set by Daniel Smith. And I really like how they turned out, very moody and somber, which is maybe why I didn't use these paints that much during summer, as it just didn't match what I was experiencing. I had another watercolor palette to explore here that I am still really fond of. It's what I've been using in my newer watercolor travel sketches as well. My cat. This was then for all of those cat-themed book illustration projects. So I made what I call my cat maps, which show typical features of Jeju. I made those into folded maps that you could open and have a little guidebook for the different famous volcanic hills. Before I decided to paint the lotus themed portrait in gouache, I had sketched this in watercolors here on the back of this one. So this is much earlier than this. I came back later. So same as the volcanic hills, I painted all the citrus mandarin fruit variations that are so famous on Jeju. And then sadly for a long time nothing much happened in this sketchbook because gouache happened. And I also just had a lot of work to focus on. I did paint a couple of the ghost tourist studies in here, and again this one from end of summer. And then more recently I finally sat down and painted in this again. These were character design sketches for a book interior illustration, so I just wanted a space where I can very loosely design what I wanted these characters to be wearing. And watercolor sketches felt like a great fit because they are naturally a more loose and explorative medium. If you remember those last concept sketches in the Hanemühle concept sketchbook, this is kind of a larger watercolor version of that. I was figuring out some colors, how green, how blue did I want this. And then actually just last night I painted a small version in acrylics of this to really nail the color mixing. So you can see how that looks very different in acrylics compared to watercolors, where everything is a bit softer, a bit lighter. This is on Strathmore Bristol cardboard, and I just like making miniature studies of illustrations because they don't take a lot of time but solve a lot of problems. I thought I'd mention that just so you know that just because I have all these sketchbooks. I do still work on loose paper, of course. I have snippets here and there. I like having everything in sketchbooks because they are easier to find again. Finally, this will show up in another video very soon. I have some movie sketches and color tests inspired by Frankenstein. We've come full circle from that first page that is focused on this Nosferatu inspired portrait. Is also the Patreon print for December, so if you're interested in getting a postcard mailed to you via snail mail, then now would be the time. So I'm trying to be a bit less precious with this sketchbook. I'm not sure if this has convinced you that all of these sketchbooks are truly necessary. Personally, I feel like they all brought something unique to my art practice, be it random spaces for doodles, to learning about gouache painting, to learning about watercolor sketchbooks that are easy to use, even if I'm not at my drawing desk. Large sizes or very small ones, the ones that are now complete and have been replaced. Does that even count as multiple sketchbooks anymore? The ones that are extremely messy and really just notebooks. The ones that I've neglected and what that maybe says about my art style, or maybe it's something I'll have to let go of. By the way, craft paper is also a nightmare to film. It completely messes up my white balance. More complete sketchbooks that were, of course, a learning experience. Everything that I've sketched in these has then helped me draw and paint other portraits and illustrations. And of course, the big one, which if I place it on this stack, will probably make the entire tower collapse. But which is the basis for pretty much everything I've painted in 2025 and hopefully beyond. Personally, I feel like all of these different sketchbooks have a purpose and are suited to different times and spaces. They all, in a way, have helped me be more creative and find ideas and also document ideas. They are all very different price classes, from the Arch watercolor sketchbooks to much cheaper paper, and I really don't think that the price makes for a better sketching experience, because again, I've been using this one, for example, a lot, or the RTX sketchbooks really are quite affordable. Same for maybe one of my favorites of the years, these tiny Hanemühle art journals that I can also highly recommend. And then of course the different sizes, because I really don't want to carry A4 or even the Strathmore art journal with me when I'm hiking or traveling all the time. As long as I slowly fill these over the years and learn from my process and can collect new ideas, new inspiration in them, I'm really happy to have multiples. So that's it. All my sketchbooks, most of them I've started way before this year. Some have joined the club during 2025. Let me know if you had a favorite among these, if you saw any sketchbooks you'd like to give a try yourself, if you have a favorite sketchbook that hasn't shown up here, because being in South Korea, I might have access to some brands more easily than you do, or on the other hand, some other sketchbooks are really difficult to find here or very expensive to ship. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in the new year with lots more sketching and drawing videos.